Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this webinar. I'm just going to do a quick sound check. If you can hear me, just let me know that you can in the chat box. Hello, everyone can hear me? All right, it looks like it's a yes. All right, so let's get started. Welcome to this webinar on buying a pre-owned electric car. I'm glad that you could join me here today. My name is Mal Skoron, and I work for Green Energy Consumers Alliance, focusing primarily on electric car education through our Drive Green program. And I will be your presenter today. Before we get started, let's go over some webinar logistics. Everyone is muted to avoid background noise, but we will have regular breaks for questions, and you can send me those questions via the questions box in the GoToWebinar sidebar. So that's it. Let's get started. Green Energy Consumers Alliance is a nonprofit, and our mission is to harness our power as energy consumers to speed the transition to a low-carbon future. Drive Green helps us accomplish this mission by getting electric cars on the road in place of gasoline-powered cars. Electric vehicles, or EVs, charged in New England can cut emissions by 75% per mile traveled. So the environmental reason to switch to an electric car is pretty compelling. And since our electricity sources are getting cleaner every year due to state laws that mandate the amount of renewable energy we have in our electricity system, the environmental benefits will only continue to grow year to year. If you're interested in learning more about that, Green Energy Consumers recently wrote a blog called A Model to Eliminate Emissions from Cars by 2035 that talks a little bit more about the connection between electric cars and growing initiatives in Massachusetts and Rhode Island to increase renewable energy on the level of cities and towns. So it's a great read, and I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in more about that. But this webinar is really more focused on pre-owned electric vehicles, which are making the technology and therefore the emissions reduction benefits accessible to all different sorts of consumers. So I am very excited to share this information with you today. And so here's the agenda for today. I'll start by talking about the benefits of buying a pre-owned electric car. And then, since people often have questions about batteries and battery life, I'll talk about what you can expect from the technology, as well as the warranty coverage on batteries. I'll then do a quick overview of some particularly popular models to buy pre-owned. And then I will give you some tips to make sure that you're getting the right car for you and navigating the car buying process the best that you can. Finally, I'll step away from the slideshow presentation for a few minutes to check out Drive Green's new tool for finding pre-owned electric vehicles in the Massachusetts and Rhode Island area. So that is quite a lot to cover, so let's get started. First off, what are the benefits of buying a pre-owned electric car? I want to start off by saying that I'm a true believer in this. That is actually me in the photo with my 2017 Chevy Volt, which I bought pre-owned after the 3-year lease of its first owner expired. So I do have some personal experience to back up what I'm saying here, and I am happy to answer questions about that as we move through the webinar. So you might already know that on a per mile basis, electric cars are much better for the environment than gas-powered cars. But manufacturing and shipping a vehicle accounts for a sizable portion of its lifetime emissions. And electric vehicles have the battery manufacturing process as an additional component of the process that contributes to emissions. So the Union of Concerned Scientists did a lifetime comparison to see how much better electric vehicles are for the climate, not just on a per mile basis, but also including the emissions from manufacturing. So this graph shown on the screen here is comparing fully electric vehicles, no plug-in hybrids, to similar gas-powered cars over the course of their lifetime. and the numbers are normalized on a per mile basis here. So if we look at the fully sized vehicles all the way on the right, they found that battery manufacturing adds about 6 tons of emissions in terms of CO2 equivalents for the 265-mile BEV, or battery electric vehicle, which is 68% more than the manufacturing process of the full-size gasoline car. So basically, we're comparing the height of the orange bar compared to the orange plus the blue for the 2 bar graphs all the way on the right. And they found that over the life of the car, since electric cars are so much cleaner per mile, the difference in manufacturing emissions is easily made up. But with a pre-owned electric vehicle, you can basically neglect the blue and orange sections when you're counting your own carbon footprint. And that's because the vehicle already exists. It's already past the manufacturing and transportation stage, so those emissions are already accounted for. And using a vehicle to the end of its useful life makes a big difference in the car's overall environmental impact. So if you look at the full-size battery electric vehicle, you can cut your carbon footprint by 1/3 if you decide to get a pre-owned electric car compared to a new one. And so this really is the greenest way to own a car. Another way to look at it is if you're buying pre-owned, you're giving a second life to a car. And when we've already invested a certain amount of emissions to produce it, like those emissions are out there already, it just makes sense to get as much life out of the vehicle as possible instead of trashing it, recycling the components, and making a new car right away. And the good news is, as automakers gain experience and improve production efficiency, something that gas-powered cars are already benefiting from, the emissions from manufacturing electric cars will fall even more. So that'll come from advances in manufacturing efficiency, better battery chemistry that uses fewer energy-intensive materials, and also the use of renewable energy to power manufacturing. So we'll see improvements in making the blue and orange section smaller for electric cars as well. And just to clarify, buying a new electric car isn't that good for the environment, especially because they're still in the minority of purchases. New electric cars make up less than 2% of all new vehicles bought in the US. And so you can really look at this graph and use it to make a case for buying a new electric car over a pre-owned gas car, for example, all other factors being equal. But I think that this graph makes the case for a pre-owned electric car particularly compelling, especially if you would like to buy an economical car. So that is a car that has a low purchase price and a low cost of ownership. Here's a comparison of 3 similarly sized cars. We have the new 2020 Honda Civic, the 2020 Nissan LEAF, and an actual listing for a pre-owned 2017 Nissan LEAF. So right away, you'll notice that the 2 new cars on the left are pretty comparable in terms of price when you include all of the purchase incentives that are available for new electric cars. Then on top of that, the LEAF is cheaper to fuel, assuming that you drive 10,000 miles a year at current gas and electricity prices. But of course, the more you drive, the more you'll save. If you look at the 2017 LEAF then, it's actually significantly cheaper to buy, but you still get the low cost of fuel like in the new 2020 LEAF. The older LEAF is still very efficient and economical, but its purchase price is a lot lower than of the 2 new cars. In part, that's because new cars bought in the last couple of years benefited from tax credits or state rebates when they were purchased new. So the price of pre-owned cars tends to reflect that. And a lot of the available vehicles for repurchase, including the 2017 Nissan LEAF showed here, are gently used, low mileage, or off lease. The example here, again, is a real car that just had 15,000 miles on it, which is practically brand new. And also, the prices listed here don't even include savings from maintenance, which would drive the cost of the Honda Civic way up if you're looking at a 5-year cost of ownership comparison. So if you are getting a pre-owned electric car, it's really a great car for the price. We'll talk a little bit more about available vehicles and what to expect from the market. But for now, suffice it to say that electric vehicle technology has come a long way since 2012, when the first widely available electric cars hit the market. All the new cars coming out right now have about 200 plus miles of electric range, which is really important to replace gas-powered cars on the road with electric cars, because a lot of people really need a long-range vehicle to make it possible for them to go electric. So many of the vehicles available for resale right now have about 100 to 150 miles of range, since they're from a couple of years ago. Since the newest technology is so much better, you can get a good price for a car that's just a couple of years old. And there are a lot of situations where limited range is really workable. So for example, if you are retired and only use your car to drive around town and get groceries and run errands, you can own and fuel a car very cheaply with a pre-owned EV. Another great opportunity to go for a pre-owned EV is a two-car household. So if you do need two vehicles, one for you and one for your spouse, for example, if you both commute to work using a car, having one be electric can cut down on your ownership costs significantly. The average person drives just 30 miles a day, which is well within the range of many of the low-cost vehicles available on the market now. And since you need to have two cars anyway, it's easy to integrate a low-range car if you have another one that can travel longer distances. A used EV is especially good for teenagers who drive very little to go to school or get to a job. Low cost of ownership makes a pre-owned electric car a great car to learn to drive on, and limited range is probably a bonus for the parents there too. And really, a pre-owned electric car is perfect for people who want to own a car as cheaply as possible. There are a lot of pre-owned plug-in hybrids available also. So if range is a big issue for you and you can't really justify getting a car that has a more limited range, like some of the early electric vehicles do, then you can still enjoy the benefits of plugging in and increased efficiency by going with a pre-owned plug-in hybrid at a reasonable cost. And I do think it's important to talk about how easily electric cars fit into all sorts of different people's lives, because the success of Tesla has created a picture in people's minds that all electric car drivers are wealthy and most electric cars are inaccessible to most people. But in a lot of ways, a pre-owned electric car is the cheapest way to own a car, and I think that appeals to a lot of people. Especially because there are a lot of other reasons to go electric. We've talked a little bit about electric cars and the fact that they are good for the climate. But in addition to lowering climate warming emissions, fully electric cars don't have a tailpipe. So that does a lot to improve local air quality, and specifically the air that you and your family are breathing on a daily basis. Without a tailpipe, there's no ozone, which is an irritant that causes choking and coughing related to smog. And there's also no particulate emissions, which contribute or exacerbate asthma and other respiratory illnesses. So electric vehicles really are a good tool for public health. Second, electric cars are smooth, quiet, and fun to drive. It's hard to really appreciate how fun they are until you're a passenger in one, until you know someone who owns one, or until you take a test drive for yourself. But it's a really different and pleasant driving experience, and it's just fun. Lots of people love the instant acceleration and torque that come from an electric powertrain, and you can more easily accelerate and merge into lanes. They also don't idle and waste power when you're sitting in traffic or dropping someone off. So there's a lot of benefits to driving them just as a technology. Finally, charging is convenient and easy. Most EV drivers charge at home or at work if it's available to them. So instead of stopping at a gas station, which is an additional detour that you have to make, you can just plug in when you arrive at your garage or office and then unplug when you're about to leave. It takes just 5 seconds, and I can tell you from personal experience, it's much more pleasant than having to go to the gas station once a week. So we will be talking a little bit about battery health next, but let me just take a small break for questions, and I see a couple of people have sent them in. Someone asks about the issues with the LEAF's battery longevity. I will be getting to that in just a little bit, so hold on tight to that question. Someone asks, in my comparison of the Honda and the 2 Nissan LEAFs, you mentioned that the Honda had a higher maintenance cost. Did I hear you right? If so, could you explain further? Why does an all-electric Honda require more maintenance than a 3-year-old Nissan LEAF? Yeah, good question. So just to clarify, the 2020 Honda Civic is a regular old combustion engine vehicle. It is not electric at all. And so when you are comparing combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles tend to require less maintenance because they are simpler machines and their engines don't have quite as many moving parts. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more in just the next slide. Someone is asking about fleet use. Are there options for buying pre-owned electric vehicles that also include some sort of warranty maintenance agreement? I'll be talking about more of the warranty information coming up. Someone asked if this webinar is only about plugins. What about hybrids? So Green Energy Consumers Alliance is really focused on increasing the amount of plug-in vehicles on the road. We support both fully electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, but this webinar is focused on, yes, plug-in models, no conventional hybrids. And then I see some more questions that I will be answering in just a little bit. So thank you for getting the jump on me on that. Glad to see that you all are engaged. Okay, so moving on to the next section. A common concern when drivers are considering switching over to an electric car is about the battery, namely how long it'll last and how much it costs to replace. So before I answer those questions, here's a little background info. We're all relatively familiar with lithium-ion batteries, which power our phones and laptops. And the batteries in electric vehicles are the same technology on a much larger scale. It's about 10,000 times the storage capacity of a modern smartphone. So it's also important to note that the battery pack for an electric car lives not underneath the hood of the car, where you would find a gas engine, but it's actually in the floor of the car. It's kind of like a skateboard, and you stack the rest of the car on top. And this is part of the reason why electric cars have good handling. So all of that weight on the bottom of the car gives you the feeling of really clinging to the road and having good control of the vehicle. There are a bunch of individual cells in each pack, and you can see how all of the packs fit into the entire battery module on the little graphic on the left. However, batteries in electric cars are much more sophisticated than the batteries in laptops or smartphones because they're used at a much higher duty. So that means more power and more storage capacity. They also have the room to use complex heating and cooling systems to keep them at the right temperature, and they're engineered to have as long of a life as possible, which is something you can't really say for smartphones and laptops. And although the battery itself can be complicated, electric powertrains are much simpler than combustion engines. Gasoline-powered engines have as many as 400 moving parts, whereas there's very little that can go wrong in a battery or an electric powertrain. They only have about 20 to 40 moving parts, depending on what you're looking at. So that's part of the reason why maintenance and upkeep costs are so low for electric vehicles. There's just less that can go wrong. So in our comparison of a Honda Civic that has a gas-powered engine and a Nissan LEAF, which is fully electric, that can account for as much as $1,500 in savings over 5 years or so. And then obviously, as gas-powered cars get older, they tend to have more problems. Most people who own electric cars just go in periodically to get their tires rotated, but there's not even oil to change in an electric car. Because of the less overall maintenance, especially if you're looking at a pre-owned car, it's a big plus that there's less that can go wrong and you're less likely to buy a lemon. So the parts and devices listed on the screen are all the things that may wear out or need replacing, or just need regular maintenance throughout the life of a combustion engine car. And quite a few of them can be very expensive to fix. And so electric cars don't have any of these things. And so when you're comparing reliability, remember that combustion engine cars have a lot of problems, and these problems are things that most people don't know anything about, and things that we've just accepted as part of owning a car. But with an electric car, that doesn't have to be the case. A major plus for electric cars, especially pre-owned car, is how reliable they are. Still, every bit of technology has a lifespan, and batteries are no exception. Battery degradation is a natural process that reduces the amount of energy the battery can store over time. We measure battery condition according to state of health, or SOH. SOH starts at 100% when the battery is fresh, and then deteriorates over time. And it's basically a measure of how much energy the battery can store compared to itself when it was new. Overall, the data shows that EV batteries hold up over time. According to over 6,000 different vehicles and their data, you can expect to only lose about 10% of range over 6 years. So what that means is if you're worried about having to replace the battery, don't be. It's very likely that the battery will outlast the life of the car. Again, that's a huge plus for electric vehicles, and particularly the ones on the pre-owned market. So the graph that we see here is an average of all sorts of vehicle models and years. And even though it's not exactly linear in reality, you can expect about a 2% drop in battery storage every year that you drive the car. And that is something that you will barely notice as a driver, especially compared to how much lower maintenance these vehicles are compared to their gas counterparts. And most importantly, it's not like you will experience a sudden battery failure, which is what most people seem to be afraid of when they are thinking about purchasing an electric vehicle. There are certain factors that contribute to battery decline. Exposure to high temperatures, consistently charging using DC fast charging speeds, or charging to 100% and then draining back down to 0% every day, all can contribute to faster rates of decline. But engineers know this, and that's why they use good thermal management systems to keep the battery at the right temperature. It's also why they build a little bit of excess capacity into the battery that's not usable. Because it protects the battery capacity over the long term. So again, I just want to emphasize, like, these batteries are specifically designed to last as long as possible. The actual rate of degradation does depend on the make, model, and year of a car. So some cars are better than others. And here on the screen, you can see an actual comparison for different model years of the Nissan LEAF. Which is the car that someone had asked about in the question section earlier. So you can see that the 2017 version of the LEAF has a much slower rate of decline than its predecessors, which is a testament to improved battery technology. You know, automakers are getting better at producing vehicles that will last for a long time. Also, since 200 plus miles of range is the new norm, the batteries that have larger storage capacities tend to fare better in the long term. And that's because using the entire capacity of the battery is more taxing than just using a small portion of it. So you can imagine it's a lot easier to discharge the car from 100% to 0% if you only have 100 miles of range compared to 250 miles of range. So that's part of the reason that you do see the rate of decline changing from year to year, and especially some of the older models tend to be the weakest. So you might use this tool to try and figure out for an older EV how much actual driving capacity your car has. So for example, if you're looking at a 2016 Nissan LEAF, after 4 years of driving, it loses about 10% of its battery capacity, which translates to about 11 miles of range. So your maximum range might only be 96 miles instead of 107 for when it was new. And that might, heavily impact your decision to pick one model year over another. Another thing that you can take from this graph is that buying a 2016 Nissan LEAF is a much better idea than buying a 2014 model. Just comparing those rates of degradation. Even if you are okay with having a lower range vehicle, you do want to buy a good car for the money. So this tool can kind of help you narrow down which vehicles and model years you would want to consider. And then finally, the 2016 and 2017 models tend to be doing the best out of all of them. You can get a good deal on the much older cars, but again, that capacity will change over time. And again, I want to emphasize, this is all in comparison of the battery. The 2017 Nissan LEAF actually won an award for its dependability among all vehicles in its class. So all vehicles of a similar size and storage capacity from the JD Power Dependability Study. It also won an award from Kelley Blue Book for its extraordinary low 5-year cost of ownership for 3 years in a row. So, having to worry about battery degradation is kind of new and different. But rest assured, these cars still are very reliable, require very little maintenance, and battery degradation is not something that you will likely notice if you go with a newer model. Finally, just as a side note, plug-in hybrids tend to be less affected by range loss, and you have the gas as a backup. So if you are thinking about buying a plug-in hybrid, it's less critical to think about battery health in this way. This tends to really only be an issue for fully electric vehicles. In summary, I've made the point that EVs are more reliable and require less maintenance, which will save you time and money. Plus, batteries hold up their performance over time. But if something goes wrong, you are covered. For electric cars, there are separate warranties for basic coverage, powertrain, corrosion, and the battery. Warranties for some of the other components might end in as little as 3 years, but batteries have much longer warranties, and these warranties are transferable to you as a second or third-hand owner, as long as the time and mileage limitations have not been met. So notice, coverage is for 8 years or 100,000 miles, which is plenty of time for a problem to arise if something will fail. Lots of manufacturers cover capacity loss up to a certain percent within the coverage period, as well as outright battery failure, which is good because that really protects you as a consumer. So even if the battery doesn't outright fail, but degrades more quickly than it should, you can get it replaced. And that means you will not be paying anything out of pocket. And again, this is unlikely to happen, but you are covered if it does for most vehicles. You can look up other vehicles and the warranty coverages that they have online as well if you're interested in a model that is not listed here. So if you're looking to buy pre-owned, there is a lot of advice out there to help you guide your decision. And I don't want to go into every little thing that you might be checking with a pre-owned car, but I will be covering some of the most important tips for electric cars specifically. But first, I will take another short break to review some questions that people are sending in. And I apologize if I can't get to everyone's question. There are plenty, and some of them I will be addressing. So thank you all for your patience. Someone asks, what is the average cost of a battery replacement? So the battery is the most expensive part of the vehicle. It is part of the reason why electric vehicles for a long time have been a little bit on the higher end of the price spectrum. I can't think of a number off the top of my head, but I know particularly for earlier models of the LEAF, the battery was about a third of the total cost of the vehicle. Since then, batteries have gotten less expensive, and so especially in the future, it'll be less expensive to replace. So I can't give you a number just now, but I will follow up with you after the webinar is over. Okay, someone is making the point that lithium-ion cells are never charged to 100% and they never go to 0%. Yes, that is true. There is definitely some additional leeway at the top end of the spectrum, at the bottom end of the spectrum, just to protect the battery and kind of prevent that full discharge, because that is kind of one of the most taxing ways to use a battery. But I kind of used that term to explain it a little easier, but I appreciate that point. Someone says, or wanted to make the point that battery degradation data are averages, and it's best to check the battery status of the individual vehicle that you are considering. Yes, thank you for making that point. It is one of the tips that I will be covering in the next section, so thank you. Someone asks, is the battery degradation chart available from the tool you will be showing later? So the battery degradation data came from an organization called Geotab, which is a fleet management company. They did the study and compiled the data. It is not part of the Drive Green tool, but I can share it with you at the end of the webinar. Okay, and there are some people are asking about how to test battery status for different vehicles, and I will talk about that in the next section. So let us go ahead and get that started. I've talked a lot about the LEAF. The LEAF is probably the most popular car to buy pre-owned. It's been around for a while. It's one of the least expensive pre-owned electric vehicles, and it's widely available across the country. But the technology has changed a lot, specifically regarding how many miles a full charge will get you. So when you're shopping for any car, note which model year has the range that you're looking at. The 2016, 2017 model year is one of the best electric cars you can get for the money, I think. But there are pre-owned electric cars available all across the spectrum, all the way from 2012 to 2019. The 2018, 2019 available Nissan LEAFs for resale tend to be priced similarly to the new version of the vehicles, minus the incentives. And so just exploring some pre-owned cars in the New England area, I found you could get a 2015 LEAF for about $11,000, a 2017 for about $14,000, and a 2019 for about $23,000. So you can see that sharp increase in price as you get to the newer, higher range versions of these vehicles. In addition to price, you might also be thinking about the number of miles on the odometer. Interestingly, most of the electric car options on the pre-owned market are very low mileage, which is kind of surprising, right? Like, when's the last time you saw a car from 2012 with just 20,000 miles on it. But a lot of the older cars are low mileage since they have limited range, and they probably weren't driven very often, and so they're in great condition. If you don't drive very much, this will make a lot of sense for you. And then in the newer cars, 2017 and onwards, they tend to be low mileage because they're off lease. So probably someone used it as a leased car for around 8,000 or 10,000 miles a year or less. So really, there are a lot of great options for the Nissan LEAF, depending on your budget and range. Another popular car to buy pre-owned is a 2016 or 2017 BMW i3. And I know what you're probably thinking. BMW, why go luxury when you're trying to own a car on a budget, right? You want to own a car for as cheaply as possible. Remember, even though it's a BMW, there are a lot of higher range electric cars out there right now. So its resale value really benefits the buyer. And for a BMW, you're really getting a low cost of ownership, a relatively low purchase price, and a good car for the money. This car is probably bought for more than $40,000 when new, so it's a real steal in the pre-owned market. And the 2016-2017 model is particularly popular. Some models even have the range extender, or REX, and that's a very small gasoline engine to help extend your driving range and give you some peace of mind if you cut it close. So the i3 goes about 80 miles on electricity, and then 150 miles total if you go for the range extender. Another popular option is the Volkswagen e-Golf. Has a similar electric range as the other two cars, about 83 or 125 miles between the 2016 and 2017 model years. But a lot of people like that it doesn't look like an electric car. You know, the LEAF and the i3 have really unique styling, and a lot of people gravitate towards a car that looks and feels like a regular car. And I've talked to quite a few electric car owners who decided to go for a pre-owned vehicle and really like this car. And again, unlike the LEAF and the i3, it's an electric version of an existing car, which might appeal to you if you tend to gravitate towards Volkswagen vehicles, or really like the Golf, for example. Finally, as a plug-in hybrid option for folks, this is the car that I happened to purchase last November. Plug-in hybrids tend to be a little more expensive and higher mileage than some of the all-electric models available for resale from 2016 or 2017. Excuse me, the technology hasn't had as dramatic of an improvement as all-electric cars, so these cars are priced more like gasoline-powered cars. And the newer and lower mileage they are, the more expensive that they'll be. Particularly for the Chevy Volt, since it's now out of production, it seems to have some really great prices. Consumer Reports has this tool where you can compare the selling prices of different cars in a certain zip code, and depreciation and car values aren't usually linear, but you can see there are a lot of good deals for this car out there. And a lot of drivers leased the Volt as their first electric vehicle in 2017, probably since a lot of them were nervous to go all electric at first. And now many of them are getting rid of it to upgrade to a fully electric car. But it's gotten great reviews from all the owners that I've talked to about it, and I really like driving it myself. Like the LEAF, the Volt has been around for a while, so if you are looking at a pre-2016 model, I encourage you to make sure you know how many miles of electric range you're getting for that model year. Also notable, a battery has never been replaced inside of a Volt, so you can go for a really old model and feel good about the battery health of it. So just looking at some tips and trying to think about advice for pre-owned electric car owners. When I was thinking about my budget and driving needs, a Volt was the absolute best option for me. So I was really able to focus in on my shopping. And in fact, I ended up only getting, or I only went to one used car dealership. I test drove and I bought the car on the spot. But if you're weighing between a few options, it is important to get in and test drive before you make your decision. You can compare the different feelings of each car and look at other factors that are valuable to you once the cars that you're looking at have been narrowed down on a range and cost basis. And it's especially important to test drive any car you're planning on buying, but pre-owned cars, it's a necessity. You know, besides making sure you actually like the car and how it drives, you want to make sure that the overall condition is good, that the heat and cooling work, that the audio and entertainment systems work, all that fun stuff. And honestly, the test drive is like test driving any pre-owned car, and there are a lot of good guides out there to help you through this part of the process. It's also a good opportunity to investigate the car's history and make sure that its battery health is about what you would expect for the age of the car. So checking battery health on vehicles is different for every car. But as an example, for the Leaf, you can check the state of its battery health right on the dashboard when you're taking a test drive. So you'll see that there are 12 bars for the range estimator. That's the blue and white bars on the left. And then there are also 12 bars to the right of that. Those are all white. And you can see that there are 12 still available on the Leaf, but those start to fade as the car gets older and its battery capacity fades over time. So when you're test driving, you should actually be able to see those bars and count them and know what the state of your battery's health is. And also remember that the Leaf's warranty kicks in if it loses more than 4 bars within 8 years or 100,000 miles of driving. So you do have that as a backup. Another thing to do is if you're taking a long test drive, you should do it on both city and highway speeds, which will confirm for you that the range estimator is accurate. And it should give you a feel for the difference in efficiency at different speeds, since electric cars are more efficient at slower speeds and tend to drop off in range more quickly if you're going fast. And as a side note, you can see this particular Leaf was used as a taxi in Europe. It had hit 100,000 miles without losing a single health bar. So there are these cases where, you know, health can dramatically be maintained in the long term if it's not being exposed to high temperatures or if it's being used in a particular way that doesn't tax the battery. So it's, you know, you can be surprised by the battery performance there. Okay, so we are getting close to the end of this webinar. And how do we now find cars that are available? So let's take some time to actually go through the process on the Green Energy Consumers website. And I can do that right on the screen. Great. Before we get into the Drive Green tool, I just want to recognize that we are in the middle of an unprecedented time because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since all non-essential businesses are closed right now in Massachusetts and everyone is being advised to stay at home as much as possible, it is probably not the best time to go out for a test drive. Based off of conversations with nearby local dealerships, sales departments are pretty much closed, but service is open. I think car dealerships are willing to work with people in cases of emergency, but for the most part, you might want to hold off on actually going in for a test drive until those sales departments reopen for good. But for future reference, you can see we do have a page on buying a pre-owned electric vehicle. This page has a lot of the information that I've talked about today in this webinar, so you can review it at your own pace or in the future when you are actively shopping for a pre-owned electric car. I'll also be sending out a recording of this webinar so that you can review it in the future as well. But when you are ready to be looking at different vehicles, then you can do so right here, clicking Browse Pre-Owned Electric Vehicles. And that'll take you to our Drive Green pre-owned page, where you can see we have actual models available for sale at certain dealerships. We try to keep this list as updated as possible from the dealerships in our program, but these vehicles do sell fast. So one final tip that I will give you is that if you see a car you like and you're actively shopping, I encourage you to fill out the form and even reach out to the dealership right away. Because even though there are a lot of good options for pre-owned electric vehicles, there are a lot of people interested in them as well. So you really got to be aggressive and try to jump on cars as quickly as you can. So as an example of how to use this tool, let's pretend I'm looking for a plug-in hybrid. You can filter based off of that criteria, and only cars that meet that criteria will pop up. You can also compare battery size, original electric range, and mileage on the different cars as well. So if I was specifically looking for a pre-owned vehicle with low mileage, then you can see I have a couple of options here. There's the 2018 Toyota Prius Prime, a 2018 Chevrolet Volt, another Prius, and a 2017 Ford C-Max as well. So you can click on those cars and reach out to all of the dealerships that are selling those cars just by continuing in the form and filling out your contact information on this form. So the listings all vary in how much info that they put, but you can note that the vehicle identification numbers were all there. So if you did want to check a car's history before you want the dealer to reach out to you, you have the option to do that. But again, once you are ready to express your interest in these cars, then you would just fill out the form, and the salespeople will reach out to you for a test drive. And it is that easy. So that is it. I am just going to ask if there are any final questions before we wrap up the webinar for this afternoon. It looks like we still have 10 minutes. So someone asked, what do the two red bars on the side of the dashboard of a Leaf indicate? Are they indicating some loss of battery capacity? So those two red bars are basically just an indication of the vehicle's last 12% of capacity. So the bars decrease from here's the slide. The bars decrease going from the top, so you would lose the ones on top at first. And then if you get to the last two bars, that means your vehicle has very, very limited range and battery capacity. So it's just indicating kind of like a warning that it is in very low health. And then someone else asks, how do I use the vehicle's VIN to research its history? So the VIN number is basically a vehicle identification number that is unique to each particular car. And so there are tools online for you to be able to search the VIN number to see if it's ever been in a prior accident, for example, or whether it is off lease, or what the previous owners were like, what its maintenance history is like, things like that. And there is more information about how to use the VIN to learn about the history of the car on our pre-owned web page. So that is something that is pretty standard across all vehicles, whether it's an electric car or not. So I didn't have time to talk about it today, but there are tools online to help you do that. Someone asks, How do insurance rates compare to gas vehicles? So insurance rates are pretty much exactly the same, no matter if you're driving a combustion engine vehicle or an electric car. You shouldn't pay any more, any less, depending on the other factors that you have about what your personal insurance rate would be. And as a reminder, I will be sending out this webinar recording via email in the next couple days, so you will have access to it. Someone asks, in addition to Green Energy Consumers Alliance website, do I recommend any other website that we ought to consider shopping at for pre-owned EV cars or plug-in hybrids? Yes, so there are lots of tools available online to try and find pre-owned vehicles. It's a little bit tricky to recommend one because, they're all different and they're all essentially providing the same service. But I think that most of the tips that I gave to try and help you pick out electric cars can be used no matter where you're trying to find the car. So there are probably electric vehicles listed on Craigslist, for example. Not that I would recommend buying a car on Craigslist, but anywhere where you can buy a pre-owned car, you can also buy a pre-owned electric car. So just going with a trustworthy seller is what I recommend. And the Drive Green pre-owned portal does, only work with accredited, insured, and licensed vehicle dealers. So you can rest assured that with our website, you are protected as a consumer. Someone asks about how mileage is affected in cold temperatures. With the lower range vehicles, like in the older Leafs, it might get a bit iffy in New England winters, even for local travel. Yes, absolutely. So there is more information about winter driving on our website. It has its own section. But yes, definitely important to acknowledge that all electric vehicles lose some range capacity in the winter because some of their battery storage has to be used in order to keep the car and its battery at the correct temperature to make sure the battery is running efficiently. So electric cars tend to lose about 30% of their range, give or take, in the winter because of those cold temperatures. So if you are looking to buy pre-owned, make sure you account for that loss in range in the winter time as well. Someone asked, will we be able to share the recorded webinar? Absolutely. Anyone that you think can benefit from this information, feel free to send it right along to them. Someone asked about accessing the actual car's battery history using a device connected to the car's computer. Yes, great point. So not all vehicles have a dashboard display of their battery health like the Leaf does. So another option that you have in order to check out battery health is by sticking a diagnostics device into the car's computer port. And that should actually be able to tell you what the state of the battery health is. And so that's one more reason to be buying from a trustworthy and experienced seller, is because, if you go to a dealership that sells new Nissan LEAFs, for example, they should be able to tell you exactly what you're looking for and how to check that information. Whereas individual sellers or people that don't have access to that kind of data storage or data analysis might not be able to give that information for you. So that would just be one additional step that you would have to do as the buyer. But any credible dealership should be able to check the battery state of health and let you know what it is by accessing the car's computer. So good point. Thank you for that. Okay, it looks like that is all the questions that I see. Okay, someone is asking a question about which models have good ground clearance. We live in a dirt road where low clearance vehicles can bottom out during mud season. Great point. So unfortunately, I think a lot of the pre-owned electric vehicles that are available tend to be older cars, and since the technology isn't as advanced, they tend to be smaller and kind of more compact cars, and not really cars that are great for, that kind of particular situation. I'm not super experienced in, the level of ground clearance necessary for driving on dirt roads. I have to admit, I do a lot of city driving mostly in my car, but it might be worth just looking out which vehicles are available to you and seeing, looking at their specifications individually and seeing what would work for you. But I can also follow up with you and see if there are any good recommendations out there. But good question. A lot of newer vehicles have better ground clearance. So for example, the Mitsubishi Outlander is a larger SUV style car. I think it has all-wheel drive as an option, and it does have larger clearance to it. There's also a new version of the Subaru Crosstrek, which is a plug-in hybrid, and that probably has the level of clearance that you're looking for. But unfortunately, those cars are pretty new, and so I'm not sure you'd be able to find them on the pre-owned market just yet. Okay, it looks like that is all the questions that I see, so we'll be able to end this webinar just a few minutes early. But if you do have any final questions as you kind of let all this information sink in, please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email. I do not have access to that phone currently, so email is probably the best place to reach me since I'm working from home. But thank you again for joining me, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.